Welcome to CS201 Summer Edition. I'll be presenting Chapter 8 to you today. Chapter 8 is all about algorithms and programming languages. The central concept underlying computation is that of an algorithm. And furthermore, an algorithm is basically a step-by-step sequence of instructions for carrying out a task. So it's just sort of like a recipe. It's steps to do something. In fact, one of the common exercises I often used to do in CS201 was ask students to write the instructions for creating a peanut butter jelly sandwich. That, as simple as it is an algorithm. And furthermore, programming can be viewed as a process of actually designing and implementing that algorithm. So it's your job as a programmer to create the algorithm or the steps that have to be accomplished for that task, and then finally translate those steps into a programming language that can actually be understood by the computer. So we've written programs in JavaScript. This allows the browser to actually carry out a specific task, but the general notion of this is just that, an algorithm. So there's a lot of unfamiliar tasks in life that we couldn't complete without the aid of instructions, that we need. Like, for example, if we're using the analogy of recipes, well, what's the recipe a master chef would look, a recipe written for a college student? It's written to, to give exact steps to the computer, because the computer can't understand the real life language we would use to carry out the algorithm. So for that matter, it's a matter of what who the audience is for that particular recipe. In our case, the algorithm is a recipe that is for the computer to understand, and that's why it must be written in JavaScript or some other programming language, and it must be very specific. So the 4 steps to solving problems are: understand the problem, design a plan, carry out the plan, and examine the solution. So, for example, let's say we want to find the oldest person in a room full of people. Well, what is the problem? The problem is, initially, we have a room full of people, and we now identify who the oldest is. And what are the steps that we would take to do that? We're going to have to make certain assumptions, like the person actually gives their birthday. What happens if 2 people are born the same day? Maybe in that case you take what hour and time they were born. Or maybe if there are more than one oldest person, then finding any of them are okay. So here's 2 different designs for this program. The first algorithm has you line up all the people along one wall, ask the first person to state his or her name and birthday. You write that information down, and then for each subsequent person in line, you ask the person for his or her name and birthday. These steps, by the way, are going out like a computer would. Sure, you could say, what are all your ages? And one by one, you could ask people. You wouldn't even have to sort out a line. And because of human memory, we could probably remember who the oldest person in the room was. But if we didn't have that ability to have that memory, how would we actually do it? So this shows how to do it. So when you reach the end of that line, the name and birthday of the oldest person are written down on some piece of paper. Because basically, if what you could do is, for each successive person in line, if the stated birthday is earlier than the birthday on the paper, then you cross that out and you write out the new information. So basically, for each person that's being asked that birthday, we're only going to write it down on paper if it's actually earlier than the previous thing we wrote. So that way, we're going to get to the end of the line, and it always will have been overwritten by the oldest person. The second algorithm basically has you line up all the people on one wall. As long as there's more than one person in line, then you compute the following algorithm. You have people pair up, first with second, second or third with fourth, etc. If you have an odd number person, the last person is without partner. Ask each pair to compare their birthdays. Request that the younger of the 2 leave the line. So now you are down to 1, 1, 1, and 1. So you have, from having 8 people in line, you now have 4 people in line. So you keep doing this process until only one is left in line, and then that person is identified as the oldest. Now, of course, if you had an odd number, like let's say you had 2, 2, 2, 2, and 1, the Joan in this case at the end would be compared with whoever that last person was. So we do one extra comparison. So which algorithm is better? Well, clearly This algorithm has a little more work in it because you have to go through every single person. This algorithm is better because it's only comparing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times for comparisons, as opposed to our other one had to do 8. But actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, the other one had to do 8 total write downs the birthday, so it had to do 8 writes, whereas this one only has to do 7. That is atypical, actually, because this is a binary algorithm, so the higher the number goes, the more work that this actually saved. What I'm talking about here is efficiency. So the idea is, how many comparisons do you actually have to do? The algorithms that have to do less comparisons are better, because those comparisons take time in the computer. In algorithm 1, the amount of time is proportional to the amount of people in the line. If you had 50 people, you'd have to go through all 50 of them. So in algorithm 2, it's proportional to the number of rounds it takes to shrink the line down by 2. So this is a logarithmic algorithm, because it's basically it's logarithmic in terms of it's a base 2 situation, because you've got 2 comparisons each time. So therefore, if you double the amount of people, the time needed to find the oldest person only increases by 1 additional comparison. By the way, logarithm, what I mean by that is the exponent to which a base is raised to produce a number. So 2 to the 10th equals 1024. Log 2 to the 24 equals 10. That's what I mean by that. So when a performance is large, furthermore, it takes more and more time on an n operation n algorithm that does a logarithmic operation. So if there's 100 people, that's going to be 100 comparisons, each one taking 5 seconds. That's 500 seconds. If there's 100 people and we have a log 2 to the 100, that actually equals 35 seconds. Because since it's logarithmic in nature, we only have to compute that part of it. This is what we refer to, and you'll hear this in other computer science classes. This is big O notation. So big O notation is basically saying if it's O of n, that's time proportional to the size of the problem. So it's proportional to the number of people in the list, whereas if it's log of n, if you double the problem size, you add a constant amount of work. Another thing that's common in computer science is searching and storing large amounts of data. So search servers were necessary, obviously, like popularity of Google shows that, but most programs have some sort of search utility. For example, you might be in a company and there's a payroll database and we need to be able to search quickly to find which record we want. There's 2 commonly used algorithms for this: sequential search, which basically goes through everything, or binary search, which we've kind of seen already. Binary search is also a logarithmic search, and it goes much faster, it turns out. The sequential search basically starts at the beginning of the list and it goes through each item. So this is equivalent to, let's say you want to find George Smith in the phone book, opening that phone book up and literally going through every person until you get to George Smith, and comparing each time. Are we George Smith? Are we George Smith? Are we George Smith? You do that like hundreds of thousands of times, or however big the phone book is, until you finally find him. And the worst case is he isn't even there, in which case you have to search through all of them. Or maybe he's the last one in the list, in which case you have to search through all of them. Of course, if you're the first one in the list, you got lucky and you did it in one operation. But since we're basing on the laws of averages, on average times you will not get lucky. Binary search basically is a divide and conquer algorithm. You divide the list into 2 segments, and basically what you do is that's your new list to search. So you cut it in half. So potential range is initially 0 through the longest line in the list. Then you say, as long as the items remain in the potential range and it hasn't been found, then look at the middle entry of that range. If that middle entry is what you're looking for, then great, you found it. If it's not, then basically, if it's greater than the desired item, you search the second half of the list. If it's less than the desired item, you search the first half of the list. And we keep breaking this problem down over and over. So it's essentially like saying, well, George Smith, S is the second half of the alphabet. Therefore, I should only have to look at the second half of the alphabet. So, okay, now you've got the second half of the alphabet. Now you divide that second half into halves again, and you say, well, what side is George Smith on? And you keep doing that over and over until you find him. Here's an example of that. We start the middle entry. We're looking for MD. Since ND comes after MD, ND is the middle of the list, we know that we can eliminate all entries that appear to the right. So next we examine the middle of the remaining entries, which is IA. IA comes before it, so therefore we take the right half of the list. We eliminate the left half. So now we're at KS through MT, and then we keep going. So, as I said, sequential search, in the worst case, you look through all of it and you don't get anything. Worst case of binary search is you keep looking through it and you don't find a single entry. So that's, again, proportional to the logarithm of the list size, so O of log n. So obviously a phone book of the United States, 300 million people, sequential search would go through 300 million inspections and comparisons. Worst case, binary search requires at most only 29 inspections and comparisons, which is impressive. So as you can see, algorithms can be very powerful. An algorithm for finding the square root of n? Well, basically, if we want to find the square root of n, we can basically say refine the approximation using this formula. New approximation equals old approximation plus n divided by old approximation divided by 2. And this just keeps repeating over and over again. So programming is all about designing and coding algorithms. The intended executor is the computer or the program that is executing on the computer, because it's possible for a program to run a program. However, the level of precision necessary to write programs can be frustrating to users. You've probably seen that already with JavaScript. It's much easier than it was 50 years ago. It's much easier than it was during times of the ENIAC, for example. So machine languages. Machine language is actually executed on all machines. It is the instructions that directly correspond to the hardware. It's all in ones and zeros. So here's an excerpt from a machine language program. As you can see, it's indecipherable. A bunch of zeros and ones. You can program in this. All you would have to do is convert each segment of numbers into an instruction, and then the segment after that into the input, and that way you would know what function each one of these is calling. But it's very, very hard to understand and nearly impossible to debug. Assembly languages evolved from machine languages. So assembly languages were the idea of we could basically take that machine language and transfer it into individual codes. But really, more importantly, high-level languages came around right after that, which allowed humans to read the actual code that was being written and more closely followed in a natural way how to solve a problem. So for example, here's two tasks that are similar. One's in JavaScript and one's in C++. One is saying enter your name, and then hello and whatever your name is. So on the right-hand side, we have the C++ program. On the left, we have JavaScript. These are both high-level languages. Now, once you use a high-level language, you can also start to reason at a higher level. You can start to think about the program as a module and think about what individual steps need to be taken to solve your problem. So the real-world analogy here is there's interpolation and there's compilation. So once you've coded everything up, the computer needs to know how to interpret the language that you've written, and then the translator needs to actually translate the entire speech offline. So that's like just an analogy of compilation and interpretation. So interpreters. For program translation, the interpretation approach relies on a program to interpret. So interpreter reads the high-level statement one at a time, executes and translates it one at a time, and displays it. That is JavaScript. A compiled language is a language like C++. In C++, we actually say, let's take that language, compile it into ones and zeros, and then execute the ones and zeros. So that's what we mean by compiled language. There's trade-offs between each. Interpreters are easier to debug, they're more dynamic, but they're slow. Since the compiler is written, can write code directly to the ones and zeros, that means it can be very fast and it can take advantage of the hardware. All right, there will be a quiz for this chapter, so please stay tuned for that. Thank you.